There's a very famous worship passage in the book of John that we like to quote and talk about all the time. And it's when Jesus is talking to a Samaritan woman and she's asking him about where the right or proper place to worship is. And Jesus answered with this verse. He says that the hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And then in verse 24 of John chapter 4, he says, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. There's a real key to our worship here that we need to understand. It's that worship has to be grounded in truth. Our worship needs to be grounded in the revelation of who God is and who he's revealed himself to be to us in the Word of God. You know, a lot of times when we encounter the presence of God, we're so overwhelmed with who he is, and it's a beautiful thing. But you can't keep growing in your worship journey if you're not growing in your knowledge of who God is. You need revelation. There has to be spirit and there has to be truth. There has to be the intimacy of the presence of God and the revelation of God. You know, Jesus said he is the way and the truth and the life. And unless we have a real revelation of God that comes from his word, that comes from truth, it won't deepen our roots of worship. We'll just kind of have a shallow experience with God. The greater you want your depth of worship to be, the greater experience you need with his presence and the greater experience and revelation that we need with his word. And so I want to encourage you, if you want deeper times of worship, study the word, worship using the passages that you're reading about Jesus, and begin to allow that expression of truth of who he is to come out in your worship. In our worship teams as worship leaders, we need to make sure that our teams are covering themselves, are inundating themselves with the Word of God. It's not enough to have an experience of God's presence on Sunday or whenever you worship if you're not rooted in the Word. So remember, Jesus said that the Father is spirit, and so those who worship him have to worship in spirit and in truth. We need the presence of God, the relationship with our living God, and we need the truth of who he is to be revealed to us. Stay in the Word, and your worship will deepen.